Hi guys, I'm Virginia Barnes,
Hi, and I'm Tim Barnes from Barnesviolins.
and today we're going to talk to you about how to motivate your child so that they practice and not get burnt out.
And hopefully, we'll have some good tips for you from experience. Having been both private teachers and parents of violinists, we've got a lot to say on the subject. So, hopefully, some useful tips for you.
I will just jump in real quick with young people, little people. As I've said before, nobody wants to practice. So hooking it to something that you do regularly, like, maybe it could be something that's done after dinner. And maybe that whoever's practicing doesn't have to clean up dinner. Also, don't forget, nobody really likes to be by themselves, locked away in a practice room. So for a young person, practicing right in the kitchen while you're cleaning up, and you can comment or say, hey, are you sure you did that right there? And that you're not like glaring at them while they practice, but you're kind of around while they practice, I think is very helpful. So that's my first thing, is hooking it to something you do every day, not relegating the child to a room by themselves. They have enough of that. And then making it short enough that they feel like they have things they want to work on the next day, that you've made it short enough that they're like, but I didn't finish working on this thing, like this stroke or fixing this fingering, and just say, okay, then do it first tomorrow, so that they are not feeling like practice never ends, that it's finite. So those are my few quick things.
Yes, Mrs. Barnes, I agree. Hooking it onto an activity that you like doing, or even with homework or right after dinner, can be a really good time to practice. I really do agree that, especially with younger students, it's really important to have parents be involved. And I think even if mom and dad are not string players, that to get some sense of understanding what the assignment is from the private teacher, and in a very gentle way, just helping to get through the practice period. I agree. Again, it's better to have things be a little too short than too long. But consistency is really the thing that pays off. And I think with more involvement from parents, it can be made a little bit more of a connected, fun activity rather than something that just feels like is unpleasant. So I think there's that part of things. I do think, as far as things like burnout and that sort of thing go, eating well, getting plenty of rest, just the things that we normally would try to do anyway, help tremendously. I do think that if you're getting burnt out on practicing, it's certainly good to take breaks, depending on the circumstances, whether it be a day or a week or whatnot. Sometimes it's good to take a little time off. But at the end of the day, as far as improving and getting better on a bowed string instrument, it really is about consistency. So I think that parents being involved, even again, if you're not string players, will help tremendously. For young folks especially, if it feels like an isolation experience, that can be very unpleasant, and sometimes then the desire to play, even if they love music, they won't want to continue. So parents, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be shy about it. You really don't have to know what you're doing if you're just in there with your child and supporting and being excited by just the fact that they're going through the activities and playing. And you'd be surprised at how quickly you'll learn to help them kind of stay on track with what the private teacher has recommended for their assignments.
Another thing is, in this day and age, if there's a special song or piece or something that a child likes, like something fun that's maybe a different genre than what they normally do for their lessons, if it's appropriate level-wise, you can download these off of the internet. You can just Google the piece or the song and just say sheet music for blah, blah, blah. And maybe that could be the last thing at the end of all the practice that's for the teacher, that, okay, now you can play this special song. Or maybe your child likes to improvise that could be the last few minutes of the practice, so that they end on something exciting and creative. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, sometimes as we're going through and we have all these things to do every single day, and you're putting the time in and getting better at the instrument, sometimes we take for granted that we can even play it at all. And that there are so many people on this planet who cannot play a musical instrument, let alone read music. There are very few people on this planet that can read music. And so sometimes we as parents, and even as teachers, but especially students, they have no idea how valuable that is, that they can even do it. One time our kids, we took them for haircuts, and I don't know, they just off the cuff mentioned to the person cutting their hair, yeah, I play violin. And that person cutting the hair was just astounded and asked all kinds of questions to them. And they looked at me like, why is this a big deal? Because in our family, everybody plays. Well, it is a big deal. It is a big deal that you can play an instrument, even the simplest of songs, pieces, and to not take it for granted. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, after all these years of lessons and concerts and this and that, my child quit. What was the point? Well, you don't know what your child would have been like without the influence of music, without learning the music, how their brain would have wired up differently, the influence of the musical instructors in that child's life, the act of learning to practice, all these things. By the way, colleges appreciate, even if you don't decide to play your musical instrument in college, they look at somebody who has done it and they know that there's something different about that person. There's a lot of compassion in being a musician, all these kindnesses and understandings that happen, and you won't know that the child is different because they've already experienced the music. It's in their life, it's imprinted in them. And so you did not waste a penny. You did not waste anything doing whatever it is they did. And sometimes people come back to their instrument 5 years later, after college is over, and they have a job and they want to do something that will help them relax after work. I know somebody who, it was 30 years after she quit, she started again, and it was a wonderful thing. So don't worry about that. And don't be, I say to people, be vigilant, but don't be militant. Don't say, well, if you're not going to practice, we're just going to send the instrument back and that's it. Don't do that. It's an average. And to value the fact that they have been putting time in, and like Mr. Barnes said, maybe a small break is in order. Maybe doing something different is in order. Like we've said a few times, there are summer camps that are just about music, and to be immersed for a couple of weeks just in music, because these poor kids, they have all this homework to do all the time, these checklists of enormous amounts of things getting into high school that they have to do in order to go to college. It's like this crazy thing. For them to have a chance that it's just music for once is really encouraging, and can get rid of burnout, and that they renew their love of the instrument, of the value of playing, just by pushing aside all this other tremendous expectations on the kids. So
I would agree that I think no practicing of an instrument is ever wasted time, even if it's not all that pleasant, because it works things like our coordination, hand-eye coordination, our brains, our sense of pitch, training our ear. There's so many aspects of the brain involved with practicing, not to mention performing an instrument, and again, not to mention loving an instrument, which that's the thing I think that Mrs. Barnes touched on that I certainly would like to emphasize a little bit. We forget sometimes what a privilege it is to play music. And we get so caught up with the specifics of assignments, of specific concerts, which are wonderful, joyful things in a lot of ways. But again, it's another obligation and a task that we have to kind of gear ourselves towards, like with a lot of other tasks, homework and other things, that sometimes the joy can kind of get pushed to the side. And it's a really good thing to remind ourselves of what a privilege it is to play music. And even these days, in my advancing age, and I still practice, and et cetera, et cetera, I remind myself just from time to time what a pleasure privilege it is to just put bow to string and pull sounds. If I hadn't had a lot of love and support very early on, I never would have become a musician. I did want to touch on also Mrs. Barnes's point about you never know when you may pick the instrument up again if a child, student decides to quit or quits after high school, doesn't want to play anymore, going into college, and they've been a very proficient, accomplished player going into college, and then suddenly they just don't want to play anymore, and parents are just like really horrified, I'm going to say it, upset, and to some extent understandably so. But in my experience, much of the time people come back to their instruments, and again, even if not in 5 or 10 years, because we live in Boca Raton, we're in South Florida, we get a lot of folks coming into our area that are retiring, and because we do live in a beautiful place, and so understandably so. But folks will come to us after they've retired and haven't played their instrument in 40 years, and one are so excited to come back to their instrument, and we've seen amazing things happen with folks' playing when they come back after that huge long break. But just imagine if they hadn't taken the huge long break, if they just said, you know, even for a few minutes a day, I'm going to keep bow to string every day, even during those times when I'm busy and have other things to do. It's just to say that sometimes if you can keep practicing through the days where at least initially we don't feel like it, one, a lot of the time our mood changes as we practice. Mm-hmm. And number two, going forward down the line, weeks, months, years, there's just so much payoff to the marginal adjustment perspective of if you can get it out every day and do some playing. Even if it's not your end all be all when you go to college, I'm not going to be a professional player. It could be a wonderful outlet when you're doing studies and studying for medical exams or whatever you're working on, to have your instrument close by and be able to play. It's a wonderful thing to be able to express yourself in that way. So I'm just trying to really advocate and maybe sell the idea that it really does pay off to practice your instrument consistently.
There are parents who their kids have maybe started when they were young, 5, 6, and it was not so hard to find a time of day to practice for a certain quick amount. Then you get to middle school and high school, and all bets are off. All of a sudden, maybe your child came home with an hour of homework at most during elementary school, but now we're talking 3-4 hours. Then in high school, if they're taking AP or IB classes, you're talking 4 or 5 hour impossible amounts of homework. I don't even know how the kids survive this. But when I was teaching all those years, I had many students who would be like, I don't know how I'm going to get my practicing done. Because some of them were at art magnet schools and they had to practice as well, yet they had this burden of enormous amounts of homework. So I would say to them, no human being can concentrate for more than, I would say, 50 minutes at a time. And so let's say somebody's doing their homework and they're studying, and then they start reading the same sentence over and over again. That means they've hit the wall with that activity. And it would actually be better to switch over to their instrument for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most, stir up that brain, and then go back to that enormous amount of homework that's never ending. And so every 45 minutes or so, have an alarm go off while they do this tremendous, never-ending amount of homework, and say, oh, yay, I get to practice. And you can turn your practice into very targeted. You say, okay, in that first 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to practice my scales. Because, these kids at the magnet schools end up with juries where they have to play for a grade, and it's very stressful too. And if they're not prepared over a long period of time, they're not going to be ready. And how are they supposed to balance that in with this enormous amount of homework? So anyway, the first period could be for the scales that are for that jury, and then okay, I'm back to my homework. Ding, the alarm clock goes off again. Okay, this period of time is for the orchestra music that we have a very important concert on, and we're going to get graded on that too, coming up. So ding, 15 minutes, yay, I've accomplished that. Third hour of homework, ding. Okay, I'm going to work on my repertoire, my concerto or whatever I have to play for the jury. This is what I had to do with my students, and I stopped doing this about 5 years ago or so. It's only more stressful now than it was then, but that they can do that. They can switch from activity to activity to stir up the juices again, and then they're not burnt out on their homework and they're not burnt out on their instrument. So anyway.
Well, I think great suggestion, and I was just going to say that especially for younger players, and some younger ones do still have to play juries and that kind of thing. I think parents can even get involved with this part in terms of just the timing with everything. And so even if you're not sitting there with your student the whole time they're studying and or practicing their instrument, that they can kind of just gently knock on the door, and now it's time to pull out your cello or your violin and we're 15 minutes and just kind of help keep an eye on that. That again can be kind of that connected up part where you've got kind of a little bit of a team perspective and with parents involved, and so it doesn't all have to fall on the student. Now if students are in high school, they're probably kind of past that for the most part, but for younger kids, again, that the idea of knowing what you're going to practice and for how long helps tremendously. And I just think that's something that parents can really get involved with to, again, connect with your child with their practicing and help keep them on course again, so that they don't just feel like the practicing is never ending. If it can be these little short bite-sized pieces of really, this is something I can do, and a feeling of accomplishment. And again, I'd say for parents, again, overly obvious, really praise your kids when they practice, because there's nothing like positive reinforcement.
That's what I was going to say. Celebrate the accomplishments. You know, we're such in a hurry. As parents, we have so many things we have to help our kids through, threading the needle with so many activities. And okay, like there's no time to celebrate. I finally fixed that problem in my piece, or I finally fixed my technique in my bow or something, and celebrate it. Just pause and be like, that's amazing. I'm really proud of you. Instead of, well, but you still have to memorize 20 pages of music. It's no, celebrate the accomplishment, because then that love grows, and celebrating the accomplishments, it turns into more and more positivity and talking about what's been accomplished rather than looking at, but these things are not done. They'll get done.
I agree with you, and I think a lot of practicing consistently, attitude is huge. So any positivity we can have about anything we're trying to accomplish that's difficult, whether it's this, whether it's sports, difficult academics, whatnot, it takes discipline and consistency, and that's the thing. But it doesn't have to be torturous, especially for younger kids. If we think about how to design a practice time, and again, parents, if you're very involved, it will help tremendously. And again, please, just because you don't know string instruments, if you happen not to, get involved anyway. The positivity aspect and your child's perspective that you care and are interested in what they're doing will matter a lot to them.
That wraps it up for today. We hope you got some good ideas and tips out of our discussion.
Thank you so much for joining us from Barnesviolins. Please like and subscribe, and let us know if you've got questions or comments. Thank you so much.